4 sessions that the ACEC Research Institute is delivering in partnership with Accelerator for America and the new Partnership for Infrastructure. The Institute was relaunched earlier this year, and we're focused on delivering research and thought leadership for ACEC members and for our industry at large. On behalf of the ACEC Research Institute and our many sponsors, we're excited to support this very important initiative. We look forward to diving into today's topic on tools and processes with our esteemed panel. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce to you one of my Institute colleagues and your moderator for today's session, Greg Cohen. Greg consults for the ACEC Research Institute and serves as our principal coordinator with Accelerator and the new Partnership for Infrastructure. Prior to opening his consultancy firm, Greg served as the president and CEO of the American Highway Users Alliance. He was a professional staffer on the U.S. House of Representatives Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Maryland and a former transportation engineer for the Maryland State Department of Transportation. So as you can see, he is very well suited to guide us through today's discussion. Greg, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Daphne. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. We'd also like to thank the other partners of the New Infrastructure Partnership, WSP, Meridiam, City Possible, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and HNTB. Just a little background on the process of this project. We've been really enjoying the work with Accelerator for America, which is a tremendous organization. They call themselves a do tank, not a think tank. And they are unique in that they have tremendous access to some terrific elected officials, really leading elected officials from all across the country that are the examples for overcoming local challenges and pursuing innovations. So NPI basically took these local challenges and innovations developed by the mayors, and they put them into federal policy that would address key themes, including sustainability, empowerment, and equity. And now we've developed this product called the playbook, which I will put a link to in the chat box. And we're advocating for these policies at the federal level and building the coalition. So we're welcoming new folks into the coalition, new organizations, and certainly interested in your input on this webinar. A total of 26 policy recommendations were developed by the partnership, and we're going to spend some time on a key theme today. As I mentioned, the Accelerator's strength is in its access to local leaders, and we'll hear from one really tremendous leader today. But you can see that the states, the cities from around the country are diverse that contributed to the product. All over the country, cities large and medium, and even some small cities that really helped to make this product a success. Today's topic is empowering localities with effective tools and processes. The key elements here are the sharp contraction in economic output, particularly as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, requires a stimulus and a good response to accelerate project recovery. While there's broad bipartisan agreement that economic stimulus is required, there's a need for regulatory improvements to make that possible. And with those regulatory improvements, we can invest these dollars quickly and get our communities back to work. So in the area of empowering localities with effective tools and processes, we identified 7 different regulatory improvement recommendations. And today, our panelists are going to focus on 3 of these. But I do encourage everyone who is on this call to read the entire list of recommendations. All 7 are important, and we have experts to talk about a handful, but they're all very valuable to learn about. And now I'm delighted to introduce what I would say is our keynote speaker. No pressure. It's not going to be maybe a keynote the way an in-person meeting might be, but we're really delighted to have the Honorable Nan Whaley, who's the mayor of Dayton, Ohio, join us today. Her career is distinguished by her commitment to public service, civic involvement, and interest in local government. She was elected as the youngest woman ever chosen for a commission seat, and then as mayor by double-digit margins in 2013. As mayor, she's focused on community development, manufacturing, and women and children's issues. But beyond just being mayor of one city, her national voice is very impressive. She is a national leader. She's vice president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. She's the chair of the International Committee for the conference. She's also on the founding board of the Ohio Mayors Alliance. And she's been committed to the political process in local, state, and national elections. She currently serves as second vice president of the National Conference of Democratic Mayors and is a 4-time delegate to the DNC. So with that, we're very pleased to have Mayor Whaley.
Greg, thank you for that nice introduction, and it's great to be with ACEC virtually. I think this partnership that we have, Accelerator for America with ACEC, to really talk about what is one of Mayor's favorite discussions across the country, which is infrastructure. I think we probably use the word infrastructure almost as much as engineers do, but it is something that we get excited thinking about how we can really redesign and think about the future of our communities, everything from our transit situations, roads, bridges, but also the very sexy work of even sewer and waterways, and then different ways of broadband and other aerospace opportunities as well. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited about just how much engagement and discussion has been around our playbook as we've continued to think of ways that we can really get solutions from the ground up, ideas that have been come locally up to nationally, and then translate national help down locally. And this is something that, as a mid-sized mayor in the middle of the country, I think is really, really important. Too often we see federal ideas sometimes that don't translate to the smaller communities, or maybe they'll work for the big 10 cities across the country, but we have to remember that most people are using infrastructure in places like Dayton, Ohio. And so how can we translate the work of national infrastructure projects that absolutely need federal help and federal support, and even state help and state support? How can we really transition that so it can get the most leverage locally to our communities? And so I'm really excited for this panel discussion about some of the recommendations that we've made in the playbook. I want to talk just about a couple of them that are really near and dear to my heart as we think about infrastructure. Number one, I think as we're in this time of COVID and we've all learned to use Zoom better than we ever thought before, we recognize that we have a really uneven system when it comes to the infrastructure of broadband reliance. And I'll take you back to the early 2000s, where a lot of state legislators and legislatures, including Ohio's, set rules that made the investment in broadband very unequal. So some of my community has very fast access, and some of mine has very little at all and can't really get to the real broadband that they need. Just this morning, for example, I was in a conversation with my police department, and one of the police department stations is in one of those broadband dead zones, and they have to use their own personal service in order to get the information they need and technology for their community-based policing. So we have to set an infrastructure that is based on equity. And that is really important for our communities as we think really what has happened in these past 20 years of the rollout of these innovations, where they've been thought of as nice haves, now have become must haves. And so the equity across our community is really, really important, and the federal government can lead the way in incentivizing and making sure that we have true access to broadband support. As we've seen during COVID, it is so necessary from telehealth to education to what I'm doing right now in my home to make sure that we can make sure that everyone is able to do their jobs and have quality services. The other thing I'd say is, mayors across the country are also very interested in not only building these infrastructure, making this happen for their communities, whether it be you know, replacing some of our older water systems, or making sure that we have good bike lanes and connectivity and sidewalks and, you know, roads that, you know, are rebuilt. But we also want to make sure those jobs are truly local. And that helps us build these, the important job infrastructure that we're trying to do every single day. Jobs that are created from the building of infrastructure are good quality jobs that teach people really amazing skills, give them a skill set that they can take along their way for their entire life, no matter what their careers are. And so making sure that the local spend is truly local is something that is incredibly important to mayors. I don't think you'll hear a mayor not talk about what is the local spend on an infrastructure job. And then finally, I'd say, in the past, we've seen either from, and you know, my time as mayor and before on council over the past 15 years, we've really seen two things. We've seen really no help from the federal government around infrastructure spend, or we've seen infrastructure spend, but you have to compete for it. And really my message has been, particularly for mid-sized cities or smaller cities that have less capacity than my friend Eric Garcetti in LA, you know, really these competitions don't really get scaled, you know, or replicated, because it's really a funding issue. And so making sure that the funding really goes across the whole country and is able to really get deep into communities is going to be really important if we're going to see long-term, real systemic changes and opportunities for infrastructure in our community. So I am so excited to hear this panel and so grateful for the opportunity to serve with my fellow mayors across the country, who I know I am biased, but I think they are the best and most hopeful part of our troubled political system these days, and really appreciate the partnerships that Accelerator for America has been able to create and you know, help us even learn what is possible for our future communities to create this country of cities that are truly connected and ready for the next 20 to 30 years. So Greg, thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on why this is probably one of the 3 top most important things that are on Mayor's mind this 2020.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor Whaley. And I'll just remind our audience that the mayor has been kind enough to allow us to ask some Q&A and questions later. We're going to have the panel speak first. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat box, and we'll be watching. Next speaker is Jamie Rubin. Jamie is the Chief Executive Officer of Meridiam, NA. Jamie has served as the CEO since his appointment in January of 2018. He leads the North American infrastructure and asset management process, which has $3.5 billion of assets under management. From May 2015 to January 2017, James was Commissioner of New York State Homes and Community Renewal, HCR, which finances the development and preservation of affordable housing statewide. And before that, he headed the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery, and prior to that, he was the New York Director of the U.S. President's Hurricane Sandy Recovery and Rebuilding Task Force, and then a senior advisor to HUD Secretary Sean Donovan. When we get to Q&A, if we have any spirited debate, before we have that debate, I want to make sure folks know that Jamie graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University. And holds a law degree from Yale. So he's going to be a tough debater, and I really appreciate you being here with us. Jamie's going to discuss procurement efficiencies, which is recommendation number 5 of the 26 in the playbook, and I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Greg, thanks very much, and you'll tell me if you're having trouble hearing me. So far, it seems to be
You sound great.
Fantastic. And Mayor, it's nice to be with you. Thanks for your opening remarks. I'll be brief because this is a pretty straightforward recommendation that our group has come up with, but I think it's one that's quite powerful, particularly coming in the time of an emergency, like we've got with the current COVID crisis, as the mayor said. We are recommending, this is number 5, we're recommending that stimulus grant applicants identify procurement efficiencies and we recommend that the executive branch agencies partner with the local recipients to help them re-engineer processes to achieve these efficiencies. So there's a lot of apple pie and I guess mother and fatherhood in this. Everybody's in favor of changing procurement rules to make them more efficient. Interestingly, this was a recommendation that came out of discussions that we had with Mayor Tom Keller of Albuquerque, who told us that really right as soon as he recognized that the COVID crisis was upon his city, he swung into action looking for ways to achieve stimulus quickly and directly without waiting for the federal government. He took 3 critical steps all around procurement reform. First, he doubled the threshold for on-call contractors. Second, he cut all of his procurement timelines in half, which anybody, I'm sure the Mayor Whaley can relate, is a powerful tool. He cut 30 days to bid to 15 days and took some other important steps along similar lines. And third, he changed the presumption, which is a legalistic sounding move, but one that's again quite powerful. Before he made this move, major projects above a certain threshold had to go through a public RFP to the council approval. The council voted and had to affirm, so had to vote positively to approve a project. And he simply changed the presumption to a negative. So the contract was approved unless the council decided to veto. And his experience so far is that that simple change has shaved many months off of any project. I think probably just having to do with human nature in some ways, changing the requirements around. Albuquerque, as many of you know, is a relatively small city. They've got about $300 million in construction bonds annually. But the mayor told us that he had projects that had been funded 7 years ago and were still in the pipeline, not yet awarded, which was an extraordinary opportunity for him if he could figure out a way to use his procurement process to accelerate those projects, which using the 3 methods that that I just outlined, he was able, he thinks, to do. Without question, procurement rules, as everybody knows, procurement rules are there for a reason. They originate sometimes in anti-corruption measures or in simply a desire to be transparent and encourage competitiveness and optimize pricing in other terms when you're looking for contractors. So you have to be careful when you make dramatic procurement changes. The mayor told us that he didn't do this lightly. He ran it by his Chamber of Commerce and other local development groups, as well as others. And while it did take a little bit of explaining and convincing, he, at the end, was able to convince them that he could maintain his competitiveness and transparency and still achieve stimulus, and had, he said, universal support for these moves. Understanding, obviously, that there is a certain amount of favoritism, particularly to existing contractors, that happens in the early stages of making changes like this, but he felt that they could find other ways to encourage widespread participation over time. Importantly also, and this is an important caveat that we in NPI's recommendations want to make clear, we're not recommending that the critical goals around underserved communities and traditionally expanding expanding goals and requirements with respect to engagement with historically underutilized businesses or underserved communities be circumvented by changing procurement rules. There's absolutely no call for that, and you can achieve. I think we believe that you can achieve with careful planning. You can do what we think the mayor of Albuquerque has done, which is achieve your desired acceleration and stimulus, while still maintaining a commitment to broad-based competitiveness and inclusion. So, in sum, we listened to what Mayor Keller's evidence, and did some internal thinking and decided that this was merited inclusion in our report as recommendation number 5. And so we recommend that in awarding federal stimulus grants going forward, federal agencies encourage their local recipients to accelerate procurement schedules and accelerate project delivery in an effort to put dollars in the ground more quickly.
Great, thank you, Jamie.
Sure.
All right. Next up, we have Manisha Patel, who's Vice President of WSP USA, running the environmental policy practice. Manisha has over 3 decades, or nearly 3 decades, of experience, which means she started probably at 10 years old. As a nationally recognized expert, she advises clients on how to best position their infrastructure projects for accelerated environmental review and permitting. She's mastered NEPA and has acumen for solving complex multi-jurisdictional problems, including working with a broad range of stakeholders, which has yielded a lot of good, lasting solutions. Prior to joining WSP, she served as Deputy General Counsel for the White House CEQ and served also as the Deputy Associate Director for Regulatory Policy at CEQ. Her accomplishments are impressive. They include the development of federal rules, executive orders, presidential memoranda addressing clean air, clean water, infrastructure permitting, conservation, sustainability, flood risk management, public lands management, and regulatory processes. Ms. Patel is a graduate of Northwestern University and the Georgetown University Law Center. So I'll turn it over to Manisha now.
Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate that. And again, want to thank you and Daphne and the rest of the ACEC Research Institute and the Accelerator for America for this opportunity, and just reiterate how much of an honor it is to be here on this panel with Mayor Whaley and Jamie and Andy. I too am very much looking forward to the discussion. I think you will probably get, by the time each of us is done with our spiel, you will see these are issues that are important to each of us and that we're each passionate about. And I think the way we advance the ball on a lot of these topics is to have these kinds of discussions. So again, thanks for the opportunity. And I'm actually going to talk to you about recommendation 6 from the playbook, about a tool, a statutory tool called a Special Experimental Project number 15. It is a very wonky DC Beltway kind of a statute. And if you're scratching your head immediately, sort of thinking about why are we talking about this, I think it underscores them. Those of you that have had a chance to read the playbook, and if you haven't yet, I very much commend you to do so. You will see throughout the playbook and in the fact sheets and other things that have been put out by the new Partnership on Infrastructure, one of the themes that you hear over and over again from local leaders is the difficulty in navigating the morass of regulations and the number of regulatory hoops and permitting hurdles that one needs to get through to really build the kind of infrastructure we need that is, forward-looking and supports an economic recovery, especially in these post-COVID times, and that is sustainable. And I know that maybe perhaps when we're doing the Q&A, Mayor Whaley can provide an example. She's got a great example from Dayton. I can't remember how many entities, 26 or something. She's had to do a lot of head knocking politely and determinedly. And so I think she appreciates what we're coming from. And so that process is really a tool that I think gets to kind of the DNA of the concepts that are embodied in the playbook and the rest of the 26 recommendations, insofar as it is a program at USDOT, Department of Transportation, that allows the Secretary of Transportation to select projects that would allow cities to really serve as test beds or hubs of innovation and experimentation, to develop processes for environmental review and permitting that can then be scaled. And so the program was, it's been around actually for quite a few years now, and it's one of these tools that isn't used as much as maybe it could be or should be. And it is, again, like I said, about developing economic recovery through infrastructure and enabling that to happen quickly by accelerating the environmental review and permitting. And the last bullet here, I'm actually going to jump to and underscore maybe a couple times as I'm speaking, which the point here is not to deviate from the foundational principles of NEPA. I think one thing that you will hear time and again from mayors and other local leaders is that you don't have to sacrifice environmental protection and good community outcomes in order to expedite or speed up delivery projects. Like it is not a zero-sum game, and one doesn't have to come at the expense of the other. And so SEP, the way it works, and again, this is, we can maybe dig into this a little bit later, but the idea is that the Secretary of Transportation can, upon request from the states, and so thereby, by extension, local authorities can work with their states to request that the Secretary of Transportation approve the use of functionally equivalent environmental reviews. And what this really means, I mean, just to kind of take it out of the, again, the Beltway speak, if there are cities that are doing really smart things, the cities that have figured out like, wow, every time we want to try to build something, we end up having to, you know, check this box, check this box, check this box, and then we're told, wait, go back and redo this box. And oftentimes, you know, and I think Mayor Whaley kind of alluded to this, at the local level, folks can get work done and they will come up with the solutions that work. And so what the use of SEP 15 would allow is to really capitalize on that and really use the smart, innovative practices that localities are already using and have come up with, and maybe others that we don't know yet, in order to navigate the existing morass. And so one of the things that I really do appreciate about this particular recommendation in the playbook, it feeds into this entire category, but if you look at all 26 recommendations, they all, they fit together nicely, and they feed upon one another. There's a synergy. And so when you start thinking about what you can do by using a tool like this to fit the federal statute into local needs, you also open up other opportunities for community involvement or for identifying economic growth and recovery in the way that, again, underscoring the very premise of NPI, which is that really the advancements that we make in infrastructure and that we have for the history of our nation have come at a local level that then gets scaled up. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Greg, because I want to make sure we leave time for questions.
Thank you, Manisha. I've thought of a couple just while you're going. Very much appreciate that, and we're delighted. Our final speaker today, we're delighted to have someone who is from the Bipartisan Policy Center. So for those people who are outside of Washington who thought such a thing couldn't possibly exist, it's not totally dead. We do have a Bipartisan Policy Center, and Andy, we're really happy to have Andy Winkler here from there, where there's an effort to actually find solutions that can reach across the aisle. Andy is the Associate Director for Housing and Infrastructure Projects. Prior to joining BPC, he was Director of Housing Finance at the American Action Forum, working to advance comprehensive housing finance reform and analyze the state of our nation's housing markets. He also worked as a policy analyst on housing and economics and received his BA from the University of Missouri and worked for its International Center. Andy's going to be discussing our recommendation number 7. And this is focused on P3 project delivery.
So thanks so much, Greg. First, thank you to ACEC and Accelerator for America for hosting this session and including me among a group of panelists who are far more esteemed. Like you said, I helped to lead the infrastructure project at BPC. We are a think tank devoted to the increasingly mind-numbing and difficult task of bringing our political parties together on some critically important policy issues. In that work, our team has looked pretty extensively at the barriers to bringing private investment into public infrastructure. I'm thrilled to be here today because we found that the political risk, permitting risk, and the sort of lack of a project pipeline were the predominant barriers to bringing in private capital. Recommendation 7 in sum is intended to reduce political risk, deliver projects more quickly, and have this higher assurance that P3 projects will be completed. I think it really speaks to this moment for 2 reasons. You know, one, in this important pandemic-induced economic depression, people are looking at infrastructure projects and trying to figure out how to deliver the projects they need more quickly and under increasing budget strain. At the same time, I think we're also really focused on how to make sure small, mid-size, traditionally under-resourced and disadvantaged communities have the same access to innovative financial tools as other large cities. So I think this recommendation is really intended to provide some of those mechanisms through federal programs like the Build America Bureau, which already does a fantastic job in providing technical assistance, but could do much more. Even in states that authorize P3s, actual experience with negotiating and delivering a P3 is still, I would say, fairly limited. Staff with expertise in traditional procurement and project management aren't always familiar with the structure of P3s, and agencies that review and issue permits for these projects sometimes question the approach. This creates just this sort of inertia among public agencies, leading them to continue to use what are often the most familiar conventional methods for delivering projects without ever exploring alternatives that could save time, save money. And with so many state and local government agencies under severe financial strain as a result of the pandemic and its attendant economic impacts, I think it's so important that traditionally under-resourced communities have the support they need from our federal government to access innovative financial tools. I would also say there's a great deal of bipartisan support for federal technical assistance programs. We've seen that before in programs like USDA's longstanding Circuit Rider program, if you're familiar with water infrastructure. We've talked about at BPC ways to second federal agency staff to local governments to try to help build up that technical expertise, because at the end of the day, a P3 is a contract. It's a contract where both parties need to come together with expertise and experience and be on a level playing field to achieve the best outcome for everybody. We can turn it to Jamie during the discussion, but to achieve that optimal allocation of risk that is so fundamental to a P3, you need to have both sides of the table, the public agency, the private partner, to be on the same playing field. The federal government can play a really important role in that regard in trying to build up capacity at the state and local levels to do P3s, to pursue innovative projects, and even to pursue innovative deliveries, bundling projects, things like that, maybe it doesn't have a private finance component, but it does have an innovative delivery method. So I'm really thrilled by this recommendation and the work overall that the playbook has achieved. I think all of them, no matter the outcome in the election, all possible scenarios, these have a lot of political credibility and I think are worth considering. So I just wanted to highlight that, in particular, the sort of on-call technical support recommendation, but there's a host of others, and I think they're all critically important to bringing that capacity to state and local governments to do really creative things. We have not only this overwhelming infrastructure need, but we also, and sometimes don't talk about it enough, but with climate change, we have to build so many different projects in a relatively quick amount of time to decarbonize. It's critically important that those projects move quickly and that we build up capacity to do so. So thank you again, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Andy. I'm going to Andrew, I'm going to take the liberty of kicking this off because the comments were just terrific. And first I want to echo Manisha's call. Mayor, if you are willing to tell us a little bit about this project, I think anyone who's worked on project delivery has some horror stories to share about projects that take too long. I certainly remember some from Maryland DOT when I worked over there, some just crazy delays for insane reasons. But do you want to respond to Manisha's?
Sure, and appreciate Manisha bringing it up. Actually, it's a project that we are very excited about. It's this arcade square that is in downtown Dayton. It's about 7 contiguous buildings together that were built 100 years ago, and they are a key part of the downtown area. So it really basically is the linchpin for all different, for our downtown to continue to have create connectability and to thrive. And the buildings actually were shut and shuttered in 1994. And they are I think the most emotional buildings of the community. It's where people would come to, enjoy the holiday season or get their seafood, to shop, and to really connect in a time where it showed true vibrancy for downtowns. And the reason why it was shuttered for so long was because it was so very difficult to figure out how to fund this project. And we always would get interest of people to do it or wanted to do it, but the funding sources to make it work were incredibly hard. And I'm happy to say last April, we figured it out with great developers like Cross Street Partners and McCormick Barron and Model Group, which has a mix of retail space still, public space, as well as housing for workers for our downtown area, et cetera. And it took 26 different funding sources to get these buildings done. Which cost a little over $1 million in accountant attorney's fees to figure it out. And my point, Dayton is a mid-sized city, around 140,000. The region's about 1 million people, maybe a little under. And so for the amount of work to move that across the finish line, I'm amazed by the community just keeping at it, and the leaders and public servants that worked on this project, and the belief and the vision for what the project could be. But there's a reason why these are so difficult, these reuses are so difficult to create, and it's because funding stacks like that to make things work and go in a community shouldn't have to be that hard. And so when we tell people that, when we announced it and had the big announcement, it took us an hour to thank everyone for every single different funding partner to come forward and talk about, which, new market they got, or, which CDFI did this, or what housing association. It was wild, but I'm very grateful everybody saw the vision of the project. It will be successful, clearly, with that many partners. But it shouldn't have to be that hard for a community to redevelop and think of its future in that way. And so that's the story that Manisha is talking about. And we're very excited, all through COVID, they've worked through it. It's very cool to go by and see the work underway. And actually, the first part of it will be done right when we're allowed to see each other again, I think. And so it's had terrific timing if you think about what's gone on over this past year. But those are the challenges that, frankly, I'm lucky here in Dayton to have some more sophisticated folks doing this work that have been around, and this is kind of a pinnacle move of their career. And mid-sized cities shouldn't have to wait for the public servants to be at the pinnacle of their career to be able to figure out how funding sources work. And it should be much easier.
Thank you. Andy, we have a question for you. With the P3 issues and the capacity for the various innovative financing programs largely unfilled, and the funding from toll credits and other user fee, transit fares, etc., kind of drying up during COVID-19, what do you see as the future? Is it really a P3? Is there any reason, and maybe Jamie could also respond to this, is there any reason to cut back on P3s, or is there a bright future ahead for them?
No, I think it definitely complicates, at least on the revenue side of things for the foreseeable future, the payback. But P3s are not all toll revenue dependent projects. There are many, many types of P3s, and some of the innovations that are inherent in them in bringing a private partner into the equation are there regardless of whether you're relying on toll revenue to get that payback. So you have availability payment models, you have others that I think are really worth considering because of the efficiencies they can bring to a project, because of the risk that they can allocate to the private partner, because of the accelerated delivery period, which is important for a lot of different reasons, whether it's to come up with some greener infrastructure to replace bridges, you name it. I think there are a lot of rationales. It's just very project specific. So I don't think that means that the outlook is bad. I think there is a likelihood, in particular with a Biden administration or a Democratic sweep scenario, that there's an infrastructure package next year. It's clearly a priority of theirs and one deeply connected to jobs. So with the potential for more funding, we should actually really be thinking about P3s to go above and beyond what just that traditional funding could do. So I wouldn't give up yet, but I'll turn it over to Jamie.
No, I think Andy's, I mean, it's well put. I don't really have too much to add. The mistake that people make, one mistake that people make when they're thinking about P3s is imagining that a P3 is a solution to a funding problem. It's really not. Building a piece of infrastructure costs money however you pay for it, whether it's private capital or public capital or some mix of both, or anything else. What a P3 really is, an alternative delivery mechanism. And it has like anything else, it has its strengths and its weaknesses. It fits well certain circumstances, certain kinds of projects, and certain kinds of goals, and may fit less well others. Our view, and I've worked for a firm that's done this almost 80 times around the world in all kinds of environments successfully, almost always successfully, is that P3s are well suited where you have a relatively complex project with an identifiable revenue stream for sure, but there's lots of sources of revenue. And that's subject to optimization through lots of different imposing competition on different parts of the project using innovation or other things that the private sector is very, very good at. Not all projects are that way, but some are, plenty are. It doesn't mean that it's free to the public sector or to taxpayers. It's just unfortunate, it's not the way the world works. It just means you have to pay for it a different way. So if we have a fiscal problem in the country, if we have use the example that you gave, Greg, if we have a problem for the next few years where there's a revenue shortfall from for any number of reasons, that's less obviously a P3 problem than it is just a funding problem. And I think it's why, frankly, a lot of people are looking to the federal government for fiscal stimulus in the short term. It's not to restart the P3 market. It's to restart the American economy.
Yeah, and if I could just, I think it's also valuable to recognize that in the P3 process, and I agree 100%, Jamie and Andy have it just right. It's not a new, it is really more about an alternative form of delivery. And in that sense, the timing of the environmental reviews and how those are staged and how those are fit in can be very critical, because oftentimes you may not have private capital that is willing to come to the table until they're sure that you've gotten through all the regulatory hoops, and you can't quite get through all the regulatory hoops until you're sure that you've got enough money to make the project go. And so there's a little bit of chicken and egg, and timing those things is sometimes more of an art than a science. But with that said, I mean, we were talking, the recommendation in the playbook is for SEP 15, which is a very specific authority that the Secretary of Transportation has. But with NEPA, there are a number of other tools for accelerating the reviews, including planning and environment linkages, and the new NEPA regulations that just went into effect on September 14th, which they are under litigation, so we'll see whether they stick and how they stick. But I think there's certainly a lot in those NEPA regs that, as we think about these kinds of initiatives and opportunities, especially from the vantage point of local solutions sort of driving a national template or creating opportunity, you know, if one city has done it, it's used Dayton again as an example, a small to mid-sized city that does it well. I don't think I'm going out on a limb here, Mayor, to say mayors watch one another and they hear about these things. And so if one city's successful at something, it gets picked up by others. And so I do think that beyond just SEP 15, there's value in thinking about other ways of using NEPA and the regulations to look for opportunities to accelerate, and especially thinking about how to then sync that into the financial processes, because I think that's a link that is can be enigmatic.
Great, thank you. And Andrew, I think you have a couple questions.
Yeah, and I want to thank again the mayor and Manisha and Andy and Jamie for being on this panel and for being a part of this project throughout. Really, it's been great to work with you all. And I have a kind of question here, following up on Manisha, what you've been talking about, and kind of what we broadly have been, mentioning is, we want project acceleration, but also kind of not, sacrificing, community values and, needs of the community. And I think, when I think about infrastructure in this moment, it not only is, right, jobs, it's climate, it's equity, right? I mean, it touches on all these kind of different, really critical needs here that our country faces. And I think, Manisha, if you could tie in some of kind of what, not just SEP 15, but kind of, environmental review more broadly into issues around environmental justice, right? And how, kind of as we're thinking about, stimulus for economic recovery, that can really be at the forefront of kind of our collective imagination, for communities that not only have been hit hardest by this crisis, but have been hit hardest for decades.
Sure, and so I think NEPA oftentimes gets a black eye or bad name as a boogeyman for sort of being a hurdle for development, but in fact, it can actually be an excellent tool for raising up some of those community voices. If you think about the scoping process that is inherent in environmental reviews, but taking it out of the context of the rhetoric of a statutory or regulatory requirement and just thinking about it in practical terms, NEPA, the way it's set up, one of the first things you're meant to do is talk to the communities and find out what solutions they want, what concerns they have, whether they be environmental or economic or social. I mean, NEPA is not, it is, the word environmental is in fact in the statute, but it is a broader analysis that is done. And I do think that there is opportunity. I think, for me, it comes back to sort of I don't know, you can call it an adage or a truism, right? But we are most certainly at an inflection point here. And as we rebuild and as we think about building up our infrastructure, if we just do it the way we always have and do it the same, we're not going to get any other different results. And I think that what's very helpful, and this is why I'm so grateful for the new Partnership for Infrastructure and for the Accelerator for America and the work they've done, is it really shows that notwithstanding kind of these, what seem to be, cast in the die kind of statutes and regulations, everyone has to go through them, notwithstanding those, there's a lot of great work and a lot of innovation that's happening. And I think the point is, how do you lift that up so that we actually change the methods and the processes by which we get things done? So I think that yes, there's an opportunity for really bringing in those voices. And as we, I think about my own community where I live right outside of St. Louis. And when we talk about infrastructure projects in our own community, the community cares because it's not, nobody sees it as a NEPA issue or a Clean Water Act issue. This is about our community. This is about our drinking water. This is about this is about the difference between taking 20 minutes to get to the grocery store or 10 minutes to get to the grocery store, right? So there's a holistic approach when you look at things through a local lens that can't be avoided. And I think that used smartly, regulatory tools like NEPA can actually speed up the process rather than be the thing that slows it down.
Can I add one?
Yeah, go for it, Andy.
I actually want to give Jamie and Meridiam some credit on that front. I once toured the Long Beach courthouse, which was a P3 project that they did. And it's a great example of exactly what Manisha is talking about, where you get community buy-in, you meet with local stakeholders, and the project design actually then reflects the input that you receive. You know, a lot, I think, went into that building to make it optimal for the city, for the city's needs, for the school next to it, things like that. So I think she's exactly right. We have examples, and the federal government is actually a really good partner in disseminating some of those best practices. And NEPA at its best, when it's when you're meeting with stakeholders very, very early on and building those connections, it actually can move quickly, and it doesn't become a barrier to delivering a project more quickly.
Andrew, I think you have, we have time for one more. I think you have one for the mayor, and then I'm going to wrap us all up in 5 minutes.
Okay, that sounds perfect. Kind of, you know, as Greg had mentioned, just one more question. I think we'll direct it at Mayor Whaley, and you know, others, of course, kind of add in. So, you know, when we started this project back in March, which seems, you know, I guess it was only half a year ago, but you know, it seems like it's been years. You know, this was, you know, the kind of COVID crisis we find ourselves in was just now starting, and obviously we found ourselves in the fall now with you know, continuing overlapping crises. And I don't know if, you know, Mayor, you want to paint a picture for, you know, where we've come in the last 6 months, and kind of, you know, what the opportunity might be really here to, as Manisha was talking about, really kind of rethink how we do things moving forward, you know, and to build back, you know, communities with more opportunity, more focus on equity, and you know, all the things we've been talking about here today.
Sure. I mean, when we think back to March, it seems like it's like back when we lived a different way, right? For now. And I think we'll go back to a lot of that, but I do think we'll be different. And this experience that our country and our communities are going through is not the same for every person. And you know, based on what your family situation is, if you're a sandwich generation, for example, and taking care of kids and taking care of parents, there's a lot of appropriate stress and anxiety about that. And, you know, I think too, you cannot really have the civil unrest that we've seen in communities without COVID. Like, I think they are, you know, they are just linked. And it's gotten people really to, I think about and act on equity and race issues in our community. That gives us a tremendous opportunity. When I talk about what's going on in Dayton and cities across the country, you know, these are the moments that leaders really want to dig into, right? Because we know a change is among us, and how that change affects our community. So if you are someone like me, a mid-sized city that does have a history of systemic racism in your community, how can this opportunity that the community's given you be able to change outcomes for your future community? And that is this pivotal moment I think we're in 2020. And we don't really know. There's like a multitude of choices that the outcomes could be. We could come out of this and people are like, you know, I'm all right with the inequity. You know, that could be an outcome. I hope that's not the outcome, you know, but I do think there is an awareness and an interest that really our democracy and citizens are giving us to make changes, I believe, that could be for the better, that could make our communities more equitable, could be more thoughtful. You know, be a time where we've seen great transition because of 2020. It's a pivotal pinch point. And this time, albeit very painful, is, I think, very, very important for the future of what we're gonna work, live, play, create, and be a part of coming when we look back at like 2030.
That's a great way to close. Let me just thank everyone for participating today. It's a great discussion, a wonderful group. I want to encourage the folks who are on the webinar to read the playbook. You'll receive an email if I don't put it in the chat box in time with the actual playbook. Encourage you to weigh in on the recommendations. We are doing so on both COVID-19 relief, which I think it's going to probably, looks like it's going to wait till after elections for phase 4 bill. We'll see. And also, of course, reauthorization of the FAST Act. And we encourage you to join with us to work with the federal legislators and policymakers. We have 2 more webinars in the series. They're both going to, again, have fantastic panelists. Encourage you to join us. Next week, we're going to start a half an hour earlier and discuss climate and water infrastructure. And then the following week, we'll be back to the current time and talk about planning and design. You can access the upcoming webinars with the link above, and we'll send that out to you as well. So I want to thank everyone again, and really appreciate it. We had a great turnout, and we will have a copy of this recorded and available for anyone who wishes to share with their colleagues and friends. Have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.